Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can I kindly request everybody to take their seats, inshallah? We'll be starting the program pretty soon. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ما بعد. Jazakallahu khairan to everybody for coming out tonight. Inshallah, we're going to start our program with recitation of the Quran. I'd like to ask Sheikh Ismat to come to the front and recite some Quran for us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا وقال إنني من المسلمين. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم وما يلقاها إلا الذين صبروا وما يلقاها إلا ذو حظ عظيم صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallahu khairan to Sheikh Ismat. I'd like to thank everybody once again for coming out tonight and joining us at this very important program. And I want to begin by saying that we're very blessed that Allah has guided us to Islam. And it's Islam that has brought us together tonight. When I look around the room today, mashallah, I see people from different countries, different regions, different continents, different languages, different ethnic backgrounds. And we've all combined, we've all assembled and come together tonight because Islam has brought us together. And this is a celebration of Allah's oneness when Allah says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ. That it's from Allah's signs that He created the heavens and the earth and the differences in your colors and in your languages. Indeed, in these are signs for those who have knowledge. So we're here to learn more about that and to understand what it means to be a community and ummah. As Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was told in the Quran, and we were taught by Allah Azza wa Jal, that we are the just nation, the balanced nation. Allah says, Inna hadihi ummatukum ummatan wahida. Indeed, this ummah is one ummah, and I am your Lord, worship me alone, Allah Azza wa Jal says. So what does it mean to be one ummah? How can we become one ummah? How can we learn to work together as an ummah? Because we have collective goals and collective objectives, which is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to teach the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mankind and to society, and to share the beauty of our deen with others. And we have a great opportunity in front of us, especially in the city that we're living in. It's a very unique city. People always ask me, why Baltimore? Why not Texas? Why not Chicago? Why not California? Why not all of these different places? And especially since I spent a few years in Texas, people ask why Baltimore, and I'm not sure if Imam Zaid knows about this, but Baltimore is a very unique city because, alhamdulillah, we have a very large presence of Muslims that are indigenous to this country. And we have lots of masajid that are representations of indigenous communities. And we also have a lot of Muslims from different countries that have migrated here. And the amount of shahadas, people coming into Islam within this region that you will find, mashallah, I'm not sure if you'll see in other parts of the country, Masjid Ihsan, Masjid al-Haq, all of these masajid, if you go there on a weekly basis, you'll find people taking their shahada. Even here at ISB, we have a very active Shahada list of people coming into Islam. And we have classes, we try to follow up and keep them engaged and try to teach them the deen. So there is no place, or I don't want to say no place, but the place for da'wah is Baltimore. And Baltimore is ripe for da'wah. It's absolutely ripe. And all it needs is for us to have a good vision and to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to have the right intentions and to use this hour as a ground for da'wah. And this deen is the deen of Allah. It's the deen that we have to share with everybody. It's not the monopoly of Ar-Rahmah. It's not the monopoly of any other masjid. It's the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how can we share that deen? How can we work together as communities? This is why, inshallah, we're here tonight to learn from Imam Zaid. I just want to very briefly introduce Imam Zaid before I call Sister Aisha to speak about, just lay down the framework for tonight's talk. So Imam Zaid, mashallah, many of you have heard of him before, has been a leading scholar in this country and a teacher for a few decades now. Imam Zaid was raised on the East Coast. He said he was born in Berkeley, California, but he was raised on the East Coast. And he had the opportunity to study political science and different subjects and sciences. He also had the pleasure of studying in the Muslim world. He spent time in Syria and studied Islamic law and Arabic in Abu Nur University. And upon returning, he was a co-founder and a very active presence in Zaytuna College, which you're all aware of. And alhamdulillah, some of our own community members studied at Zaytuna College. My own student, Justin, who you all know, Justin Poe, mashallah, he studied here for 4 years, and then he went to Darus Salam, completed his Alimiya program there, and then he went to Zaytuna College and did his master's in Islamic philosophy, and also Bilal Acevedo went there as well, mashallah. So this is a great institution that is graduating and producing individuals, inshallah, that are going into different realms and really impacting the spaces that they are in. I was also told that Imam Zaid was a great football player when he was young. Was that true, Imam Zaid? I wouldn't say great. But it's the wrong football anyway, Sheikh. I mean, the right. Okay, so right. Right. So anyway, so Imam Zaid, mashallah. Thank you. So alhamdulillah, we're very honored to have Imam Zaid here tonight. I'm going to call it Sister Aisha, inshallah, to come to the front and just lay down a framework for tonight's discussion. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah al-khair, Shakir Hussain. I just want to first welcome Imam Zaid and just say, Allahumma barak feek. It is truly an honor and a blessing to be in your presence again. Alhamdulillah. I'm following in your footsteps. I'm trying to track you down. Jazakumullah khair. Welcome to all of you. I want to just thank you so much for coming to ISB, to coming to welcome. You know how they call Muhammad Ali the people's champ? I call Imam Zaid the people's Imam. Like he is just that person that, alhamdulillah, if you want it broken down, you want certain text, certain understanding broken down, he can give it to you in a language that you can understand. And in not just in a language you can understand, but within a context you can understand. I remember years ago, I read his bio, and I love the way it began, because it's actually started off when you read like bios of, you know, big shuyukh and our scholars and our teachers, mashallah, it starts off with like where they went to university. And he actually started off like, I grew up in the inner city of Connecticut. And I was like, yes! Because just from the onset of that, it made me know that whatever he learns, to be able to take that back to those origins, to reach his people, and he's done exactly that. So I just want to thank you so much, Jazakumullah al-khair, for being here. Tonight, inshallah, as we talk about the call towards unity, and particularly within this month, it's something that, as we know, subhanAllah, African-American history, or the history, particularly the African-American history in general, and African-American Muslim history is under attack. And programs for which that our children are able to learn that within a pure setting, within a pure context, is under attack. And subhanAllah, as I was going over the verse in Surah 13 of Surah Al-Hujurat, when it talks about, Ya ayyuhan nas, right? In the beginning, we're all familiar with this, and to tell you in the translation, in the beginning, it says, "O you humanity, I've created you from male and female," right? That you may know one another, and into different tribes and nations, so that you may know one another. what I really, really love about Allah Azza wa Jal is that his language is for every time and circumstance. Because when we talk about diversity and inclusion inside of the Islamic context and what we want inside of diversity and inclusion in our ummah to be one ummah is not necessarily always what other people mean when they mean diversity and inclusion. And they're actually using some of our history in order to take away some of those Islamic values. And so when Allah Azza wa Jal, even in talking about nations and tribes, like first is saying, you're from the essence of, you're from one mother and one father, right? But then Allah Azza wa Jal is saying, like he's even speaking about it, like he even addresses the issue of gender, right from the beginning. Like when we talk about it, like understand وَذَكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى, right? So even in that understanding of addressing diversity and inclusion and how you come together, there's an Islamic framework for how we do that, for how we understand it, for how we practice it, for how we give that out to our children. And so as I think about, even today, I was, a couple days ago, I saw on the news when I arrived that the African American history program inside of universities and colleges were under attack, and they wanted to remove African studies. And then when I saw some of the things that were included, I was saying, subhanAllah. Imam Zaid mentioned today in Salatul Jum'ah about how Muslims have to be the head of it. They have to be the leader, not just always jumping on someone's platform, because we sometimes always end up being the tail of the horse as opposed to the leaders that we're meant to be. And so again, as I think about Imam Zaid, he's been a leader, he's been a khalifa for us, he's been teaching us for how do we as Muslims maintain our tradition while at the same time progressing, right? Progressing in the right way together. Jazakumullah khair, Imam Zaid.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, it's a great honor to be here. First of all, like all the young people, there's a lot of young ladies in the back. Why don't you guys come up here? There's space, and then on that side where that big, huge, giant monitor is, because you're looking at people's backs. Just, get over there. And brothers, there's a lot of shabab. Come up here, there's space. Fill in the front up here. Tazahamu tarahamu. Like you crowd in together, you'll find mercy, inshallah. Barakallah, mashallah. Tabarakallah. Ya ahlan bil-shabab. Tabarakallah. Yeah, look at this. When the saints come marching in. Allahu Akbar, kabira. MashaAllah. Allah bless you guys and bless you ladies. Assalamu alaikum, young man. How you doing? What's your name? Ibrahim. MashaAllah. Allah bless you, Ibrahim. Give you long life filled with barakah. Alhamdulillah. So, first of all, I'd like to thank Ustad Aisha for those very kind words. Alhamdulillah, she is working in the Gambia. You support her project. She's doing great work. I've seen it with my own eyes a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So support that work. It's really uplifting, inspiring, and it's a part of what we're going to talk about tonight, inshallah ta'ala. So the history, they say people who don't know their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes because they don't learn from those mistakes. They also say there are people who have no history, they have no roots. And the people who have no roots will be soon swept away by the winds and the tides and the vicissitudes of time. And so we need to be rooted. One of the reasons some of our young people, I shouldn't say a lot, are really caught up in a lot of things, some of which have just absolutely nothing to do with Islam, is because they don't have a sense of rootedness. They don't have a sense of tradition. They don't have a sense of history. You know, one of the things I was blessed to do in the Gambia is to go to the village of Kunta Kinte. Some of you are old enough or wise enough. Because if you're not old, but you're wise and you know what's going on, you are able to view or read Roots. Alex Haley, who collaborated with Malcolm X on the autobiography of Malcolm X, Alex Haley, an African-American author of great repute, decided to trace his roots. And so he traced his lineage back and back and back and through Chicken George and back, and he ended up in a Muslim village in Gambia. And that Muslim village, Alex Haley, who, I don't know, to my knowledge, he never took Shahada, despite ending up in a Muslim village in the Gambia, he helped to rebuild the masjid. And the wonderful thing is, people in Africa, they know their history, and they know their roots. And they know who was taken from their family. That my great-great-great-uncle was taken and shipped across the Atlantic, was taken in this place, in this battle, or kidnapped while going on this business trip to this village. They know that. They know the names. And I had, last night, we even put it on the screen at Georgetown. They know where Kunta Kinte's house was. It was behind the bicycle in the picture I took. They know where the masjid was because the masjid still there's been rebuilt. His masjid was probably stone. That was the preferred building. It wasn't adobe, but in that part of the Gambia, they used stone. So it was probably stone, beautiful stone building. Well, over time, it went into some disrepair, and Alex Haley helped to rebuild it. His Quran school, so being a West African Mandinka warrior, part of their training was memorizing the Quran. The Quran school is still there. They still use the wooden slates, the lawh. And the sheikh is still there. The students are still there. Some of them might use the same lawh that Kunta Kinte used. Those things don't age. They're like a fine something that won't be mentioned. They get better with age. They're like a fine Muslim. They get better with age. So some of those children might be holding the same slate that Kunta Kinte held. And so it's still there. And the thing that struck me was that a peaceful life, relatively peaceful. There's squibbles and squabbles with neighboring tribes or tribes from across the Gambia River, but pretty much there's peace. And the fruits there, the mango trees are there, and the banana trees are there, and the papaya trees are there, and the fish were there in tremendous abundance because they didn't have a government that sold out to the Chinese and give all the fishing rights to the Chinese, and these giant trawlers coming and scooping up all the fish and processing them on an industrial scale on board and dumping the waste in the water that's polluting the water of the fishing villages that are still there. They didn't have that, so they had a very good diet. A lot of protein from the fish, a lot of fruit, vegetables from the gardens, and it's all still there. It's there. So the Quran and the Sheikh and the Lawhat, they saw the peaceful times, and Islam was there. And they saw slavery and all of the brutality and the destruction, the death, the pillage, and Islam was still there. And they never stopped teaching the Quran. And they saw colonization, and Islam is still there. The Portuguese came, and the French came, and the British came, and Islam and the Quran are still there. And they saw all of that come to an end. And Islam and the Quran are still there. And then they saw colonization mentioned, and they saw liberation, and they saw neo-colonization, and they saw the waning, but not the eradication of Islam. And Islam, the Quran is still there. And now I go there in 2023, and the Quran is still there. The Sheikh is still there, chilling, leaning back on the wall with his switch. Some of you know what a switch is. And the kids are crowded around, and the Quran and Islam is still there. And so they have a sense of that historical continuity. And it's absolutely critical that we gain that sense, because those are our roots. Those are our roots. All these young brother Ibrahim right here, those are your roots, Ibrahim. What's your name, sister? Sahar. Those are your roots, Sahar. And we have to connect to those roots, because when we connect to those roots, all of us, not just those of us who might be of African descent or those who might have connections even today to the Gambia or Senegal, all of us, if you come from South Asian family, an Arab family, a Turkish family, a Malay, Indonesian family, an Uzbek family. Alhamdulillah, we got a lot of Uzbeks, mashallah, moving into the community. Uzbek. Those are our roots, because we collectively comprise the American Muslim community. And so our American Muslim history doesn't start when our parents came here in 1965 or 1976 or 1987. What would be the next number? 65, 76, 87, 1990, 1998. You're adult. You can't raise your hand. I know. Put your hand down. These young people answer. Now, that your Islamic history as an American Muslim doesn't start at those dates. Your Islamic history starts with Kunta Kinte, and it starts before Kunta Kinte. Your Islamic history starts before Columbus got here. If you read Ivan van Sertima, they came before Columbus. He talks about the transatlantic textile trade. He talks about the ability of West Africans to come here because of those equatorial currents. They're so strong. Not him, but others talk about when Abu Bakr, Mansa Abu Bakr, the half-brother of Mansa Musa, the great leaders of the Mali Empire, the richest political regime on earth during this time, because they had more gold than any other country on earth, right? The Golden Hajj of Mansa Musa, where he, in approximately 1324 AD, he makes Hajj, and he has camels loaded down with gold, and everywhere he goes, he distributes gold for free. So much gold in Egypt that it depressed the gold market for 13 years. The gold market was thrown out of whack because gold became cheap because Mansa Musa gave out so much gold. But his brother before him, when he was asked by Al-Umari, the great Muslim historian, how did he ascend to the throne of such a wealthy kingdom? He said that his half-brother, who was the king before him, he sent 2 expeditions, the second one with 2,000 ships out into the Western Sea, the Atlantic, and they never came back. And there's strong evidence that they landed in the vicinity of Belize in present-day Central America, Belize. And there's one of the reasons you find the people in Belize and Panama, you find so many African descent people as opposed to the native people in places like Guatemala. Or further, yes, Ibrahim. Allahu Akbar. See, your mother might be a descendant of Abu Bakr, the great king of Mali. I knew you had a royal look on your face. That's why I asked you your name. I said, that brother looks like royalty. What's your name? He said, Ibrahim. That's how I knew his name. Allahu Akbar. Now I know why. He's got Belizean descent. Allahu Akbar. And so, Allahu Akbar. So that's our history. That's our history. They came before Columbus. They came before Columbus. And when Columbus came, he found evidence of Muslims. Columbus comes at the very height of the Inquisition. The Inquisition is designed to identify in order to eliminate and destroy Muslims and any vestiges of Islam. Right or wrong? That's the Inquisition. When Columbus sails in his journals, you could go read it if you know Spanish. When he sails across the coast of Cuba, he said he saw a beautiful mosque on a hill. Columbus knew what a mosque was. He knew what a mosque was because he was trained as part of that inquisitional. His voyage to the so-called, well, he's going to India, was commissioned as part of the celebration of the fall of Granada. It's no coincidence that he left in 1492. Right? We learned in school in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. In 1492, in January 1492, Granada fell. The last bastion of Islamic political strength in the Iberian Peninsula. And to celebrate, Columbus was sent off. And Columbus says he saw a mosque on a hill in Cuba. When Cortez goes in Tenochtitlan, present-day Mexico City, and they're routed by the native people, in his journal he says that this capital of the Aztec was a beautiful city with many wonderful mosques and temples. If he said mosque, we could say, well, he just used that for temples. If he said temples, we say, well, they weren't Muslim people. He said mosque and temples. He knew what a masjid was. There are 10 cities in Mexico, several in the United States, one in Pennsylvania, I know, one in Texas, Matamoros. Why was cities in North America, particularly in present-day Mexico, present-day Texas, be named Matamoros? What does Matamoros mean? You don't have to know Spanish. Arabic will suffice. Kill the Muslims. And what was the battle cry of the conquistadors? Santiago, Matamoros, St. James, kill the Muslims in this land. Why was that their battle cry? Santiago, Matamoros, St. James, kill the Muslims. St. James was the Muslim slayer. Why was that their battle cry in this land if there weren't any Muslims here? That's our history. Then when they formally began colonizing these lands, the first slave revolt of African people in this so-called New World was undertaken by Muslims, Wolof, from Senegal in 1592 on the plantation of Dom Carlos Colon. Don Carlos Colon was the son of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus, when he migrated from Italy to Spain, he changed his name. He changed his name from Christopher Colombo to Cristobal Colon. Cristobal Colon. And his son, Don Carlos Colon, had a plantation in present-day Dominican Republic, then known as Santo Domingo. This was pre-Haiti, and the French didn't get their peace yet. He had a plantation, and the Wolof slaves commandeered some horses. They were cavalrymen, and they routed the Spanish garrison, protecting the Spanish settlement, and they went into the jungle and formed a Maroon independent Muslim village. That's our history. When other Muslims were brought here and they started propagating Islam, and in the 1540s approximately, another Wolof Muslim, Pedro Quilafo, Pedro Gilafo was boiled to death in a pot of oil. And you read the records, what was his crime? For propagating Islam amongst the native people. That shaheed is our history. I don't care where you come from. Those are our Muslim ancestors in this land, because our ancestors is a spiritual ancestry. And if you reject that, then when you're reading the end of Surah Hajj, and you get to the phrase, Millata abikum Ibrahim, don't read that, because he's not your father. Because maybe none of us are physical descendants of Ibrahim. He's our spiritual fathers. Most of us probably aren't descendants of the Arabs. But those Arabs, women such as Khadija radiallahu anha, Aisha radiallahu anha, Salama radiallahu anha, Juwayriya radiallahu anha, Habiba radiallahu anha, and the rest of the Ummahatul Mu'minina, the mothers of the believers, they are spiritual mothers. And if you readily accept the reality of that fact, then you readily accept that those Muslims, many of whom were scholars, are our spiritual ancestors in this land. We accept that? We good with that? That's our history, brothers and sisters. And those are our roots. And so if you're young and you're on your campus and you feel all alone and you don't belong and they're telling you what are you doing here? Go back to where you came from and say, listen, my people were here before Columbus was here. My people was here before the United States was the United Snakes. Right? There's the first flag. Right? That's right. There's the United Snakes. Don't tread on me. My people were here before the United States were the United Snakes. Ayyub bin Sulaiman was here in 1731 when this land was still a British colony. Ayyub bin Sulaiman was a hafiz of Quran. He was a scholar of the deen who studied in Timbuktu. He studied in Timbuktu. And he was kidnapped and he was sold here, nearby, Annapolis, Maryland. And then sold into slavery on a plantation in Kent County, Maryland. And because he had the spirit of freedom like Kunta Kinte, he ran away. And when they caught him, they asked him, why'd you run away? He said, I couldn't pray in peace. When he would pray, the master's children would pour dirt on his head. So the fortunate slave. His biography, Fortunate Slave, I've seen a copy of it in the Schomburg Museum in New York City, is the oldest extant work of African American literature. It's the oldest work about the life of an African in what would become the Americans. Is a Muslim, Ayyub bin Sulaiman. So as opposed to Frederick Douglass, one of your favorite sons here in Baltimore, one of your possibly Muslim ancestors. Sylviane Diouf discusses in her book, Servants of Allah, African Muslims enslaved in the Americas, how many people whose name were Bailey, and Frederick Douglass was Frederick Bailey first, there were Bilalis. The Baileys were Bilalis. And so Frederick Douglass, what happened when he ran away? What happened when he tried to learn how to read? He was brutally beaten. You can read it in both of his narratives, the first and the second. He was brutally beaten. When the fortunate slave, Ayyub bin Sulaiman, the Muslim slave, who didn't have to learn how to read because he already knew how to read, just as Kunta Kinte knew how to read, and those thousands of other Muslims who were in those katatib, those Quran schools in their villages throughout West Africa knew how to read. He was given a musalla. Why'd you run away? I couldn't pray in peace. Your bratty kids throwing dirt on my head when I'm prostrating. Oh, well, we'll give you a room to pray in. He's still not satisfied. He said, I'm Fulani. We're pastoral people. Put me over the livestock. Put him over the livestock. He's still not satisfied, so he writes a letter to his father. He heard the ship that had brought him a year earlier is coming back. He said, give this to the captain. I think his name was Pike. Give it to the captain and have him bring it, send it to my father. He'll send gold. His father was the Emir of Bundu, in present day the northern tip of Futo Jello, in present day eastern Senegal, southeastern Senegal. Send it back to my father. He'll send gold. Gold was very common. These are rich people. There's some of you saw the movie. I saw it on the plane. That's why I watch my movies. It's free. The Woman King, right? And the point there, the very majestic walls of the palace of the king. Africans know how to build. They have majestic cities and towns and villages. And they have wealth. Know that. Said, my father will send gold. He'll free me. He'll buy my freedom. Unfortunately, when the letter reached Annapolis, the ship that sailed on to Liverpool in Great Britain, send a letter to Liverpool, catch up with the ship. The letter went to Liverpool. The ship had sailed on to West Africa to get some more human cargo. The letter ended up in the hands of James Oglethorpe. James Oglethorpe was one of the founders of the originally slave-free colony of Georgia. Right. Oglethorpe can't read Arabic. I couldn't read that letters in the West African script. I'm like, man, this is challenging. They send the letter to Cambridge or Oxford, one or the other, to the Orientalist scholars there who can read Arabic. They translate the letter. Oglethorpe is so impressed with the erudition of the author, he sends the money to Maryland to liberate Ayyub bin Suleiman, the fortunate slave. And we know these details from his biography, the fortunate slave, Job bin Solomon, the fortunate slave. And they don't tell you Job bin Solomon is Ayyub bin Suleiman, the Muslim scholar. When he gets to England, he learns English, so he's only here 18 months. And like many slaves, he doesn't learn English right away. He's here to work, not to read Shakespeare. He never learns English. The journey across the Atlantic, even though he's extremely sick, he falls ill, he learns English in 6 weeks sailing across the Atlantic. How was he able to do that? Because he knew the foundations of rhetoric, of language. He was thoroughly conversant with the trivium and the quadrivium, the foundation of the West African Muslim curriculum. So he knew grammar, rhetoric, and logic, the foundations of language. He probably knew 3 or 4 African languages, and he knew Arabic fluently. So English was like a walk in the park. In those 6 weeks, he learns English to such a level that he's able to debate theological and philosophical issues with the scholars of Oxford and Cambridge. And they're so impressed, they induct him as a full member in the Spalding Regent Society, at the time the most prestigious Western academic society in Europe. So how do we know these details from the records of the Spalding Regent Society, whose members at that time included one, Alexander Pope, and one of the great, and one Sir Isaac Newton. And Ayyub Suleiman is inducted as a full, not honorary member. And they're so impressed, they get him an audience with the Queen. And the Queen is so impressed, she gives him a ship full of books and the latest technological and scientific instruments, and sends him back to West Africa as a free man, as an agent of the Royal African country. We'll forgive him for that. Now, the fortunate slave. So when he gets to West Africa, he wants to go overland to Eastern Senegal back to his village. And when he's going, he actually meets the raiding group that kidnapped him and sold him into slavery. The queen gave him guns. He wants to light them up. But the people with him, they said, they're a large number. Let's relax, relax. So they start talking. So they don't recognize him. He's wearing European clothes now. He's a little bit older. He says, you remember the Mandinka, Fulani rather, Fulani young man you guys kidnapped a couple years ago and you sold to Captain Pike? Well, what happened? They like, the strange thing happened. We sold him, and one of the things we got in exchange were some guns, some handguns. And we gave one of them as a gift to our king. And one day the gun went off and killed the king. Ayyub bin Suleiman, the fortunate slave. Make a great movie. He said, okay, I don't need any revenge. That's revenge enough. That's our history, brothers and sisters. That's our great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, our spiritual grandfather. Millat abikum Ibrahim, ummahatul mu'mineen. Those are our ancestors. So when someone's telling you to go back and what are you doing? You don't belong. This is a Judeo-Christian country. So I beg to differ. If you want to describe it like that, you better throw Muslim in there. Because we came before Columbus. Ayyub bin Suleiman came before America was America. Ibrahim Abdurrahman, another prince. Right? He was so regal, they called him Prince. And you want to read the details of his story, a great historical study by Terry Alford. One of the early works on a Muslim slave here in the United States. Prince amongst slaves. And UPF made the whatever you call that genre of half documentary, half feature film. Terrible acting. Don't tell Michael Wolff I said that. But the book is amazing, and the film is definitely worth watching. He was literally a prince. He was the son of Karumaka Alpha, who unified the Fulbe, the Fulanis, into a great Muslim kingdom. He was the son of the unifying king of the Fulani. And so he literally was a prince with an amazing story, incredible story. While he was still a free man, young man, he was the head of his father's army, military. So he was a minister of defense, to use today's terminology. He too studied in Timbuktu. He was an alim, a scholar in the religion. I forgot to mention Ayyub bin Suleiman, amongst the things he did in England, he wrote 3 copies of the Quran, 3 masahif from his memory while he was in England, and pages of those masahif, some are still extant, they still exist in museums there. He wrote 3 copies of the Quran from his memory. Someone go in your browser, Google Images, Ayyub bin Suleiman. So you see a picture of him. He, a portrait, and the portrait is, I saw it in the British Portrait Museum. It was on loan from, I think, a museum in Philadelphia. The portrait is about from the floor. Like you look at it, you think it's a small thing, to here, about from the floor to there. The portrait. And when I saw it in the British Portrait Museum. So he has on Western clothing. He says, so the painter, he's so impressed with the dignity and regality, you found it? Let me see. Make it big. Make it big. Come on, you're tech savvy. You're under 20. Yeah, there. In his native clothes. And he says, I will only let you paint me if you paint me in my native clothes. I don't want to be painted in this European garb here. And the guy says, well, the painter, the artist, he says, well, how can I never seen your native clothes? Ayyub bin Sulaiman, he says, you got pictures of Jesus all over the place. You never saw him. And he described this. He described this. And the painter painted this from his description. And it's like a photograph. La ilaha illallah. This is our history, and those are our ancestors, brothers and sisters. Those are our ancestors. So Ibrahim Abdurrahman, he is here at 1791, right after. So Ayyub Suleiman before independence. Ibrahim Abdurrahman soon after independence. Kunta Kinte between the two, 1750. These are our ancestors. Before Ibrahim Abdurrahman comes here, while he was in West Africa, there was a explorer European explorer who's lost. And the Fulani, they find him, they bring him, he's nursed in Ibrahim Abdurrahman's house. He's nursed in his house. So he knows the family members. This man, Ibrahim Abdurrahman, ends up in Natchez, Mississippi, on a plantation in Natchez, Mississippi. He had his own garden, which was common, and he used that to earn money, selling his produce in the market, Ibrahim Abdurrahman. One day, this man who was nursed back to health in his house, he's in the marketplace, he sees him and he stops in his tracks. Well, he stops his horse in his horse's tracks. He's on the horse. You know what I'm saying. Yeah, this is a metaphorical speech. So he stops his horse in his tracks. He said, I know that man. And he said, you're the son of the king who saved my life. And he says, yes, he recognized him. He goes to the plantation owner and he begs him to let him free him. But he wouldn't do it. Why? Because Ibrahim Abdurrahman was the bookkeeper. He knew how to read, he knew how to write, he knew inheritance law, he knew how to work with numbers. He was the bookkeeper of the plantation. He was the most valuable slave that this man had. He refused to liberate him. He writes a letter to his father. No, he writes a letter to the king of Morocco to show how the Muslim communities were integrated. And he asked the king of Morocco to intercede on his behalf because their relationships between Morocco, that wasn't always like that. Then they invaded the Mali Empire, or Songhai, and forced Askil Muhammad to flee Gao with 3,000 boats sailing down the Niger River. But there were times of good relations. And so his father's a king. And he's the king of a wealthy kingdom. And so there's relations between him and the king of Morocco. So the letter goes to the king of Morocco. And he intercedes with the ambassador to Morocco, who goes back to the States. At the time, the Secretary of State is William Clay. William Clay intercedes, Henry Clay intercedes with the president, John Quincy Adams. This is the 1820s. John Quincy Adams dispatches an emissary to Natchez, Mississippi to purchase the freedom of Ibrahim Abdurrahman. And so like Ayyub bin Sulaiman, their literacy was one of the keys to their liberation, and the literacy was in the Arabic language. You find your Pan-African brothers and sisters, the Arabs and Arabic destroyed Africa. So, well, you know what? If you don't know Arabic and the Arabic script, because any pre-European history of Africa is written either in the Arabic language or the Arabic script. So the Hausa, Fulani, Mandinka, Bambara, Wolof, all this history is in Arabic or the Arabic script. And so our dear Pan-African friend who wants to eliminate that, wants to cut off us from our African history and only get it through European languages and European prejudices. So we have to educate them. Wade Nobles, Dr. Wade Nobles, one of the leading Pan-African scholars at the University of California, goes with Imam Musa Balde on a trip to Timbuktu. And he has an epiphany because one of their arguments, Islam is not an indigenous African religion. And when he goes to Timbuktu and he's surrounded by those million manuscripts, and he finds out that some of the African families in Timbuktu, which is a Muslim city founded by a Muslim lady named Baktu. Tim is the well, and Baktu is the lady that found the well. And in the desert, a well is very valuable. And so Baktu's well becomes the site of a settlement of Muslims with the Tawarikh from the north, and the people from Hausa land, and the people from the lands of the Mandinka and the Wolof. They all come together around Baktu's well. And they establish a city of knowledge and learning, which becomes the headquarters of a mighty empire. When the wealthiest nations endow the wealthiest universities. Like America's a mighty nation, not always right, but has a lot of might. The greatest universities are here. They have the largest endowments, which is a reflection of the wealth and might of the nation. Harvard University, Yale University, Johns Hopkins. Got to show you guys some love. These are the wealthiest. Georgetown. You got to show Abdullah some love. He showed me a lot of love. These are the wealthiest, most richly endowed universities. In its time, Sankore Institution, a university rather, in Timbuktu was the wealthiest endowed, highest level university. Those million manuscripts, every science, religious sciences, physical sciences, astronomy, chemistry, you name it. Most of it in Arabic. The level of knowledge so high when Abdurrahman at-Tamimi, who is a sheikh from Al-Azhar, he wants everyone, if a scholar of import wants to go to Harvard to teach. I want to go to the best. He wanted to go to Timbuktu to teach at Sankore. He arrives and he sits in one of the lessons and he realizes my level is too low. I can't teach here. He goes to Marrakesh in Morocco and he studies there with the shuyukh for 5 years to up his game, and then he goes back to Timbuktu. That's the level they attain to. In any case, Ibrahim Abdurrahman, he studied there. So these are our ancestors. Towards the end of slavery, a great scholar who also studied at Timbuktu, Umar bin Said. Amongst his accomplishments, he's the most prolific of all the slave writers. Umar bin Said has written from his memory 31 pages from the beginning of the Risala of Ibn Abi Zaid al-Qayrawani, which is a text that a Maliki scholar would have mastery of. And those 31 pages are still extant. They still exist in a museum in Atlanta, Georgia. This is our history. This is the history of our people here in this country. And with the ending of slavery, one of the women, some of you read the Book of the Negroes, which is a historical fiction. But at the heart and center of the story is a Muslim girl, Amanatu, and Amina. She eventually becomes freed from bondage in Charlotte, not freed, runs away, like many did, to the British-controlled city of New York. And when the American rebels are about to capture New York, They know that the rebels are going to turn them over to their former slave masters. And so they organize themselves and they record their name in the book of the Negroes. And the woman who's doing the recording is Aminatu. And they organize themselves and they flee under British protection to present-day Nova Scotia. And from Nova Scotia, many of them become part of the movement to go back to Liberia to form Freetown. That lady is part of our history. She's part of our history as Muslims in this country. And so slavery dies out with the waning with the Emancipation Proclamation, even before that, gradually. After 1806, where legally you couldn't import any more slaves, but they have breeding grounds. And you can read about that. Here in Maryland, Carolina, Texas, where slaves are literally bred like thoroughbred horses. And they're illegally bringing slaves in, like they illegally bring other commodities in today, fentanyl and whatever else is snuck into the country, and illegal immigrants, etc., so-called illegal immigrants. That's a misnomer. Anyway, that's a whole nother story for another day. But there are no institutions like this masjid and its schools and its Quran school and its youth group. So slaves, if they had the fortitude, could practice Islam. And Sylviane Diouf and others document that. So you had slaves who are on a starvation diet, near starvation diet. Not a starvation diet, I shouldn't say that. Because if they're starved to death, you don't get any return on your investment. There's no ROI. So they're given just enough food to work for approximately 14 years and then to die. Because if you're a slave master, you don't want a bunch of old people hanging around. Where does 80 cents from every healthcare dollar in this country, what's it spent on? It's spent on Medicare for elderly people. 80 cents of every dollar. So you think a slave master wants to take care of a bunch of old people and spend 80 cents of every dollar of profit that he gets from that free labor on taking care of old slaves? So the diet was designed to let you work just long enough to work out your productive years and then die. The average working life of a slave was 14 years. So you're on a near starvation diet, and on that near starvation diet, you have Muslims fasting Ramadan in the heat of southern plantations. So don't talk about, I go from my air-conditioned house to my air-conditioned car to my air-conditioned office, but I'm working, pushing paper all day, and I can break my fast because I'm too tired to fast. I need a rukhsa. A rukhsa. You don't need a rukhsa, you need some spine. And you need to identify with the history of your Muslim ancestors who were fasting Ramadan on a near starvation diet. That's what you need. You need to plug into that. And then you get some backbone and realize they wouldn't take a legitimate excuse. I'm not going to make any excuses. And that's the value of history. When we understand history, we understand warriors, we understand princesses and queens who are Muslims, who are sacrificing and fasting and praying and running away because they couldn't pray. When we plug into that history, that gives us inspiration to do what we need to do to raise the banner of Islam in this land. We are the fulfillment of their prayers. You think these Muslims who were scholars, these Muslims who were sacrificing to uplift the religion, you think they didn't make dua? That one day in this land, their blood, their sweat, their tears will bring forth generations of Muslims who would build the masjids they couldn't build, And so Sylviane Diouf talks about that there was vertical growth of the community, but no horizontal growth, because Muslims free to practice. And so as long as those slaves were coming, you have masahif circulating. There are records of slaves asking these ship captains, when you get back to Africa, bring me back a mushaf. There are records, bring me back a Quran I can read. Bring me back this or that book of knowledge that I might study. This is documented history. This is our history. This is our history. But when the importation of slaves stopped, then the Muslims stopped coming. And so as Imam Siraj Wahaj sometimes say concerning conversion, sometimes conversion is like a bucket. New converts come in, but there's a hole in the bottom of the bucket, and you have Muslims flowing out. We have to plug up the bottom of the bucket. So everyone that comes in stays, and then the bucket doesn't run out from the bottom, it floods over with the new Muslims and the second generation of Muslims and the third generation of Muslims and the fourth generation of Muslims. But it died out. And gradually people lost touch with their tradition. You can read that in the records of the Work Progress Administration, the WPA, during the time of FDR in the 1930s, when he documents, they document in the Sapelo Island and the coastal islands off the coast of Georgia, the remnants of Islam. They talk about how my grandmother used to face the east and pray 3 times a day. So they didn't see Fajr and Isha. And they talk about the rice cakes they gave on as a ceremony. This is part of the Eid practices of their forefathers. And how all those Bilalis became Baileys. Look at all the Baileys in that area. They're the descendants, many of them, of Salih Bilali and Bilali Muhammad. This is our history. And then you have people mentioned the other night, like Edward Blyden. He's not a Muslim, but he's sent to West Africa by Queen's College. It's a Christian school in New Jersey which would grow to become Rutgers University. I went to Rutgers, graduate school. Some of you might have gone to Rutgers. Any Rutgers? I know, Safraz, where you at? Don't hide. Raise that Rutgers hand. You're representing for the Scarlet Knights. On College Avenue campus, the quaint little campus with the old sandstone buildings, with the wrought iron fence around it, that's Queen's College. And when Biden went there, they wouldn't let him enroll as a student. This is a Christian college, but we're not that Christian. Goodwill towards all men and peace on earth. We're not that kind of Christian. We're the crusading type. But you could go to West Africa as a missionary. And so he accepts. And he goes to West Africa as a missionary. And while he's there, he notes how in West Africa you have all these Muslim tribes. And they all have a certain solidarity that you can see on display today. They all have their Eid together, whether they're Mandinka, whether they're Wolof, whether they're Bambara, whether they're Tawarikh, whether they're Fulani or Hausa. They all have this Arabic language that connects them together. They all have this Quran that connects them together. They all have these rituals and this Hajj that they mobilize and go on together. And so Blyden, historical debate, did he ever become Muslim or not? Some say yes, some say no. That's a historical debate that still rages. But Blyden sees Islam as a potential unifying element in the Black Atlantic. The Black Atlantic being the African diaspora that stretches from West Africa and through Great Britain and across the Atlantic to the eastern shores of what will become America and down into Central America, the Caribbean and South America, particularly Brazil. and particularly northeastern Brazil. And so he sees that Islam can be the unifying force that unifies all of the Africans in the diaspora. And so what that does, when Islam is now dying out as a lived reality, it becomes an intellectual, it becomes the focal point of an intellectual conversation that gives Islam a certain prestige in African American intellectual circles. And that prestige, and we're talking now the latter quarter of the 19th century, it becomes the spark that begins to ignite movements like Noble Drew Ali's Muslim Science Temple, Moorish Science Temple. And their Quran was not the Quran, but they're using language, Moors and Quran and Islam. And Garvey's movement, which was deeply influenced by Islam. So Marcus Garvey was mentored by Dusay Muhammad, was a Muslim, of some say Sudanese, Egyptian. Some say he was actually a convert, Afro-Caribbean convert, Afro-British convert. Historical debate. In any case, there's no debate that he was a Muslim. And he begins to introduce to Garvey Pan-Africanism, which becomes the foundation of Garvey's United Negro Improvement Association, which he forms in Harlem. So Garvey goes from Jamaica, the land of his birth, to Great Britain. In London, he meets Dusay Muhammad. He's mentored by Dusay Muhammad. And he's introduced to Pan-Africanism, and he's introduced to Pan-Islamism. Dusay Muhammad becomes a leading writer for Marcus Garvey's paper. And if you go and research the articles, all of them have something to do with Islam. Another writer was Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who was an Ahmadi scholar. And the Ahmadis were part of the Hindu community. And the Hindus were part of the black community. Because they were dark-skinned people who could not live in the suburbs in the 1910s and 1920s. And so and that's one of the reasons many of the early Muslim converts, they become Ahmadiyas under the influence of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq and the writings of Muhammad Ali, his translation of the Quran, his book, The Meaning of Islam, great books which has the approval of Azhar. So they were from this, I think, the Ahmadiyas or whichever one, whoever says Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's not a prophet, he's just a reviver. Qadianis, he was Qadiani. And he had a large following amongst African Americans, including Sheikh Wali Akram. Wali Akram comes into Islam under Mufti Muhammad Sadiq and many others. And then they leave because when Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who was a legitimate scholar of Islam and Arabic, and he's teaching the brothers and sisters Islam and Arabic, he's succeeded by someone who was trying to teach them Urdu. It didn't work. And so they all revolted and became Sunni Muslims. And they founded, amongst others, the first Cleveland Mosque, the first Pittsburgh Mosque, and you can read about that in Robert Deneen's Black Pilgrimage to Islam. An incredible work. You can read about how Dusay Muhammad, when he left Great Britain and came to America, settled in Detroit, he became instrumental in creating the Unity Society, which he, as an African descent individual, unified the Iraqi, Lebanese, Yemeni, Shi'is, and Sunnis into one unified community. Him and Sheikh Ismail Bezzi, who was the grandfather of Sister Najah Bezzi, who many of you know, one of the great leaders in our community today. He founded the Zaman Center in Inkster, an all-black suburb of Detroit, of people brought from the South to work in Henry Ford's factories. They formed the town of Inkster. And once the factories began to move out, and massive unemployment, Inkster became like Don't Ghoster. And they have no police force anyway to protect you. Not that the police necessary to protect us. In any case, Sister Najat founds an organization and a huge warehouse there to provide services, job training, food, etc. for people in that neighborhood. She's highlighted in some of the post 9/11 documentaries and things. Incredible sister. Her grandfather works with Duse Muhammad, and you can read about that in Islam in Old Detroit. An incredible study. So these are people. These are people. So Marcus Garvey, he attracts a lot of people to Pan-Africanism. And through his paper, they're exposed to Islam. And two of his leading disciples are Earl Little and Louise Little, who happen to be the mother and father of Malcolm X. So as we mentioned last night, Malcolm X didn't grow up in anarchy. Malcolm X grew up in a Garveyite home. His father was one of the leading missionaries of Garvey's movement. His mother was one of the leading writers of the newspaper. We talked about the trivium and the quadrivium. His mother went to an Anglican grammar school in her native Grenada. She was fluent in French as well as English. She was conversant with grammar, rhetoric, and logic as the foundation of that grammar school. And she was an incredible writer. You can read about her besides what Malcolm mentioned in the autobiography, in Ghost in Our Blood by Jan Carew. And in that book, he talks a lot about Malcolm's mother and her impact and influence. Al-Rijal Qawamun ala Nisa. A lot of our sisters today, under the influence of wokeness, don't want a man protecting them. What did a man's protection provide for Louise Little? It provided the strength and the support, not a perfect relationship. There's no perfection in human realms. That's why Islam equips us to enter into family life and to deal with the drama that family life brings. There's something called patience, as sabr, that has an unlimited reward. إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. There's something called ithar, giving preference to others. No, have it your way. There's something called ithar. There's something called tahammulul adha, bearing abuses. Now we get a little bit of an insult, a slight. Someone gets mad, as human beings tend to do. We say, that's a microaggression. You're oppressing me. The Muslims say, mashallah, basita. That's nothing. Mashallah. May Allah forgive you. May Allah forgive me, astaghfirullah. I didn't mean to say that. It calls us to family life and then equips us to deal with the drama. But we're taught nowadays, no, that drama is oppression and you just need to extract yourself. You don't need a man. They're all toxic anyway. Right? Toxic masculinity. You're in a dark alley, you wish there's a toxic man somewhere. You don't want no non-toxic. You've been stalked on the street and it's 12 at night and the only man there, should I intervene? I don't know. That would be toxic masculinity. Boy, you better get mad and go save that sister. But what happened when Earl Little was taken away by the Klan or whoever murdered him? What happened to Louise Little when she didn't have that support and that protection of a man? You know what happened to her. May Allah give us tawfiq and may Allah give us common sense. And may Allah bless us to understand the nature of society and not to fall in for these social experiments that the initial returns aren't very good. The initial returns aren't good on the social experiment and the new family and the sexual Wilhelm Schmidt's sexual revolution, which, the triumph of this German kafir Fasik The culminating is the normalization not of men with men and women with women, or people with everybody. They have what, pansexual now? The culminating moment is the normalization of incest. That's what these kafirs are aiming for. Because when incest is normalized, there is absolutely no more role for Abrahamic religion in our sexual and ethical systems. That's what they're aiming for. That's what the effort to disrupt. Sound familiar? To disrupt heterosexual patriarchal normalcy. That's taken verbatim from the charter of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 queer black women to disrupt heterosexual patriarchal normalcy. You got Muslims like, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Shoot, you want to do something for Black Lives, you want allyship, ally with the church. Church been fighting this stuff, like that's the foundation of Dr. King and his movement. They've been fighting oppression, not as long as our native brothers. You saw the thing, fighting terrorism since 1492. And got some brothers on them horses. Not that long, but for a long time. Why don't we ally with them? Because they part of the problem if you're an atheistic kafir who wants to destroy everything that provided any sort of stability in human societies. You don't want to ally with them. So you got Muslims who are religious people working to undermine other religious people to align with secular atheistic people to destroy the family. How do you judge and assess things? May Allah give us tawfiq. But those Muslims, so in that incubator, Malcolm X comes out. And Malcolm, the teacher, I went to his middle school. I took the Malcolm X tour. Went to where Earl Little, the railroad tracks. They've been paved over now, but the crossing sign is still there where Earl Little was murdered, thrown under a train, and then it says it was an accident. There are a lot of those kind of accidents. Went to his elementary school, went to his middle school, to his high school, the middle school, where they told him, you can't be a lawyer. You got to be realistic. And where did that aspiration come from, to be a lawyer? That came from the house of Earl and Louise Little. And when Earl Little was gone, and the family fell into dysfunction, and Louise Little was driven mad, not by the circumstances, she was struggling, and it was a heavy burden, by the so-called social service department. They drove her mad. I've been to my brother and I have a sister in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Went to the Kalamazoo Mental Institute, whatever they call it, this dungeon, prison-like building where Louise Little was confined for several decades. I went there. Malcolm came out of that home. And that home gave Malcolm the vision to aspire to be a lawyer. But when I went to that middle school and I reflected, they did the world a favor. Because if Malcolm had become a lawyer, he probably would have been a lawyer right there in Lansing, East Lansing, home of Michigan State University. Probably would have been a tremendously successful lawyer who had a nice career and a nice home and raised a nice family and lived happily ever after. And the world would never have known Al-Hajj Malika Shahbaz. We have to look at history with a wide lens and, in a way, thank that person. But Malcolm, he drifted away from his roots. He ended up in prison, and he began a correspondence with Elijah Muhammad. And that correspondence, whatever the faults of Elijah Muhammad, he was able to build men. They called the man behind the men. Because it was Elijah Muhammad that gave the direction and vision to Malcolm. And then Malcolm gave that foundation and that intellect that he inherited from his parents and that organizing ability that he got directly from his father, because he would go with his father on organizing and missionary trips for the Garveyite movement. And he was astute and brilliant, so he observed what his father was doing, how he organized the people, how he built chapters of the UNIA throughout the Midwest. First in Nebraska. What was the city? Where Malcolm was born. Come on, people. Omaha, Nebraska, and then in Lansing, Michigan. Malcolm was following in the footsteps of his father. His trajectory was interrupted briefly, and then he came back to his roots. And when he came into the Nation of Islam, it's no coincidence that the 3 temples that existed in Detroit, then Chicago, and Washington, D.C. became 100 temples, opened by Malcolm, right from Boston, Massachusetts, Malcolm, Worcester, Massachusetts, Malcolm, Springfield, Massachusetts, Malcolm, Hartford, Connecticut, Malcolm, New Haven, Connecticut, Malcolm, Norwalk, Connecticut, Malcolm, Bridgeport, Connecticut, Malcolm, down into the East Coast, down the East Coast. Malcolm brought Muhammad Speaks. It's no coincidence that Malcolm would start the most widely circulated newspaper in the history of African American press. Was not his mother a writer for the Garvey paper? These are not coincidences. These are the results of a divine arrangement orchestrated by the Lord of all the worlds, Tartibun Ilahiyun Jamil wa Hakim. La ilaha illallah. And then Malcolm continues his growth and trajectory under the tutelage of his sister and many others. We know before Safraz's time in New Jersey, when I was a student at Rutgers University, there was Safed's father, and many of you know Sammy and Safed Chadovich, Teaneck, New Jersey. Their father, with M.T. Mahdi, a Palestinian activist, and you think no one's out there protesting the Zionists. M.T. Mahdi and Safed Chadovich Senior, Dr. Safed, and M.T. Mahdi, the father of Anissa Mahdi, the film producer, they would go alone to these rallies and confront the Zionists. M.T. Mahdi was beaten up by a Zionist mob that broke his back. Those are your ancestors in this land. Those are the people who preceded you. And they would go to Malcolm and tell Malcolm, this isn't Islam, Malcolm. What do you say about us? Safed's father's Bosnian. We're white. We're not devils. We're your Muslim brother. And they chiseled away at Malcolm's consciousness. And then his sister Ella becomes a Sunni Muslim. And she's invited to Hajj, and she gives the ticket to Malcolm. Says, it's more important that you go. This is our history. And while that's taking place, you have people, Ustad Aisha was teaching this morning about Sheikh Dawood Faisal and Mother Khadija, who started an Islamic movement in Brooklyn, New York, a Sunni Muslim movement in the 30s and 40s and 50s into the 60s. And they're building a community around La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And Sheikh Dawood Faisal is a musician from the Caribbean. He's a musician, he's a merchant marine, he's traveled the world. He comes into contact in the Mediterranean with students or through New York, at the port there, students of Sheikh Al-Alawi. He becomes the muqaddam for the Sheikh in the Shadili Tariqah. People don't know. This is our history. You can read about it. I'll send you an article on it if you can't find it anywhere. You know how to search the web. If you don't find it, get in touch. I'll send you a copy. These are articles. And we mentioned Sheikh Wali Akram. They leave the Ahmadiyya or Qadiani movement, and they become Sunni Muslims, and they form all of these masjids. Dr. Izzuddin, who leads a group of Muslims out of Philadelphia, converts. They found Izzuddin Village in South Jersey, an independent Muslim village. And Islam Town in upstate New York. Islamabad. Okay, I got the name wrong. Islamabad. Let's do this right. They found Islamabad in upstate New York, a Muslim village that still has African American Muslims there living to this very day. These people love the religion. They want to practice the religion in freedom. This is our history, my brothers and sisters. And then you have all those other, you have Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb. Dr. Umar Farouk documents his life, a brilliant study. How Webb is the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines. And the Philippines, the South Philippines, they're all Muslims. He comes into contact with Muslims. He becomes so impressed, he converts to Islam. The U.S. ambassador to the Philippines converts to Islam. And then he comes back to Kansas and then New York City. He founds a newspaper. He organizes a movement. You have William, I think it's William Blunt English, who is a post-revolutionary war person, converts to Islam. He goes to Egypt and Sudan. He leads armies there. And he's very famous for when one of the young boys is injured and they're getting ready to leave him. He goes back and gets him. He said, "We don't leave our brothers behind." And he rescues this young boy. His story is documented. This is all our history. And those immigrants who start coming from Syria and Lebanon, they found like masjids, the mother masjids in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, found masjid in South Dakota in the 1890s. There be the Albanians who come to New England. The oldest masjid in New England was founded in 1909, I believe it was, in Maine. And then they found in Waterbury, Connecticut, a masjid in 1916 that burns down in the 1940s, and they rebuild, and it's still there to this very day. Albanian Muslims. And then those Bengalis and Yemenis that come to the Central Valley and California to grow our fruit. Our history, part of our history as Muslims in this land, Cesar Chavez. You all heard of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, who started the United Farm Workers Movement. And many of those Muslims in the Central Valley, they joined that movement in the first martyr because the bosses and organizers, they start killing people. And the first shaheed is a Muslim, Muhammad Daifullah, a Yemeni Muslim who's working with Cesar Chavez in the Central Valley in California, along with those Bengalis who are picking the fruits and growing the vegetables and become an integral part of the United Farm Workers Movement under the leadership of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. That's our history. And so then you get people like coming influenced by Malcolm, the Darul Islam movement, Sheikh Suleiman Hadi, and people who began to reach into the prisons in the late 60s and into the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and today, and start one of the greatest sociological phenomenon in the history of this country. That's the conversion of, I would say, since the late 60s, when the Darul Islam and the Nation of Islam, and then the Imams under the leadership of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad go into these prisons and start mass conversion. I would say conservatively, 500,000 of our brothers have converted to Islam in these prison systems. At least 500,000. That's a miracle. That's a miracle, brothers and sisters. You have Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, who's kicked out of his father's movement because he goes to Azhar with his brother Akbar Muhammad. Akbar Muhammad finishes, gets his PhD, goes to SUNY Binghamton with Allahumma salli, the content of character, Sheikh Ali Mazrui, with Dr. Ali Mazrui, and quietly does his scholarly work. It has nothing to do with the nation. Like, that's not Islam. I'm an Azhari graduate. I don't want nothing to do with that. I'm going to stay here and chill in academia. If you're chilling in academia, don't get guilty. Just do some good work, some quality work. But Warthaddin Muhammad goes to his father and confronts his father, gets kicked out of the movement, comes back, gets kicked out, comes back, links up with Malcolm. Malcolm, this ain't Islam. Malcolm, I know that. Dr. Safed Chadovich and M.T. Mahdi and Dr. Tahir, who was at South Brunswick Islamic Center, Egyptian scholar, went back to Egypt. He passed on, one of our elders. They've been telling me that. Omar Bashir, the Sudanese student who's stalking Malcolm. Malcolm, that ain't Islam. Malcolm, I already know that. I just got to make it official. But, so they come out. Imam Jamil, H. Rap Brown, converts to Islam. Starts the community of Imam Jamil. Chapters all over the primarily eastern part of the country. Then establishes base in Atlanta. And we know that he's set up for a murder he didn't commit. The murderer confessed. They won't accept his confession. I did it. Man, shut up. We got to keep Imam Jamil off the streets. Imam Jamil, we mentioned, he is taken out of the state system and put in the supermax because he's dangerous. Why is he dangerous? He's dangerous because he's converting everyone around him to Islam, including the leader of the Aryan nations. That's why they got him out of Georgia. They divide and rule the prisons based on racial divisions. When you got someone who's bringing the races together, like Imam Jamil, they said, Bob, you know what just happened? Imam Jamil, he just converted the guy's fat something to Islam. Well, we got to get him out of here. How are we going to control him if the blacks and the whites come together? It'll be Bacon's Rebellion all over again. It'll be a progressive movement all over again in the 1890s. Bacon's Rebellion, 1680. The white slaves and the black slaves get together and take over the plantation. So the plantation owners, the empire strikes back. We can have a lot of stuff. We can't have the black slaves and white slaves getting together. And so that's the birth of white supremacy. We tell the white folks, you're not slaves anymore. You're still poor, dirt poor, with no power, but you're not slaves. You're free like us. Yeah, you're indentured, sir. We'll rename your slavery. So you're not slaves like the black slaves. That means you're better, because you're not slaves. They're slaves, you're better. They're the cursed descendants of Ham. So you're better than them. Yeah, we better. That's white supremacy, and you divide up. 1890, same thing, divide them up. Start to come together on the communist movement in the South, like Oprah Winfrey, the great debaters. Some might have seen that movement. They're organizing, bring the black folks and white folks together, divide them up. In the prisons, bring the black folks and white folks together, got to split them up, get Imam Jamil out of here. He's creating transracial solidarity, which is what Muslims tend to do. I'm not saying this audience is proof of that. I'm just saying a whole lot of people from a whole lot of different backgrounds are sitting comfortably together as brothers and sisters united by Islam. It's not perfect. There's no perfection in human society. But it's something that you won't find in a whole lot of other places. What did Malcolm say? The most segregated hour in America is church time on Sunday morning. And the most segregated neighborhood in America is the cemetery. Because if a black person is buried in a white cemetery, that cemetery is going out of business. That's the most segregated neighborhood. Muslim cemetery is not like that. I can guarantee you. It's not perfect. Thank Allah for la ilaha illallah, and then we work to make it better. We don't just scrap it because some crazy people say scrap it. You know, those white Muslims need to denounce their white privilege. I've never read that in Quran and Sunnah. We want everybody to share their privilege. Say, hey, we having this fundraiser. Bob, can you come? Bob, come write a big check. Like, don't renounce you. You tell him to renounce his privilege, you might renounce his Islam. I came to Islam to get away from all that. Now I'm finding Islam. I'm out. Check out the Buddhist. Bob, come back. Don't renounce your privilege. Share it with the rest of us. Oh, shoot. You want to call Bob up. Bob got a law firm, and you got some legal trouble. Bob, don't renounce your privilege. Make a few phone calls. Hey, that's Islam. That's Islam. This is the dunya. We don't envy people for what they have. We praise Allah. Tell them to put هذا من فضل ربي. Then we introduce them to this thing called zakat and sadaqah. Tell them to put $1. Well, they're rich. Put 1,000 every morning in the sadaqah. It might be big, but you do it for the barakah. I know you pay saving for your polo and your nautica. They get the real polo and nautica, not the Chinese knockoffs. We in the flea market buying fake Gucci bags. Sister Amina down there getting the real one. She's in Macy's and Saks, Fifth Avenue. They're putting your money in their sacks. Allah give us tawfiq. That's our community. These are our people. This is what we have to offer this country. We have work to do. They paved the way. And that's what unifies us. When we accept that history as our Muslim history, we united. So to bring the two together, the theme of unity and our history, once we acknowledge that African Muslim transgenerational, trans-historical foundation of this community, we united because we have a common history. And the only way to reject that history is to reject Islam. And to reject the idea that our reality transcends physicality. And that's why those Arab mothers of the believers are our spiritual mothers, even if we're not Arabs. That's why Ibrahim alayhi salam is our spiritual father, even if we share nothing of his lineage. That's why Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is our prophet that we adore. More than we adore our biological mothers and fathers. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. None one of you truly believes until I am more beloved to him or her than his or her father or parents, their son, their children, and all of humanity. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this is the foundation of our unity. I don't know, I went over the time. I totally disregarded the time. Come on, let's get real. But it's not my fault because there's not a single clock in this room. So it's the master's fault for not putting a clock in this room. You know, you look there, the clock make you feel guilty, like tick, tick, like 9:30, tick, tick. No clock, no guilt. May Allah bless all of us. May Allah bless all of you. May Allah bless this community. It's a beautiful community. May Allah bless us to overcome our imperfections. We're not perfect. Someone come in like, you know, I feel uncomfortable. What do we need to do to make you comfortable? You know, what do we need to do? You know, how can we be more accommodating? How can we reflect that unity that's on display every Jummah? How can we reflect that in the board and reflect that in the nature of what we're teaching? How can we? Let's work it out. Just like let's work out our domestic situations. And let's work it out. We're Muslims. We work things out. That's the beauty of Islam. It gives us a foundation to work things out. We get into trouble when we don't build upon that foundation that Islam provides. That's when we get into trouble. And so it's very important for us to know that foundation, to learn it, to understand our history and the responsibility we have to those who preceded us. Those people, their blood, sweat, and tears built this country. We have an obligation to them. Those people who were beaten out of their name and beaten out of their deen. We have an obligation to them. We have an obligation. Now, we mentioned in other settings, it's like a relay race. The worst feeling in the world, that's Brother Tariq. He ran track, son ran track, is to drop that baton. Because you don't lose. You pull up in the 100, 200, you lose. You drop that baton, everyone on the team loses. Everyone on the team loses. And you know, there's 4x400. That's a hard race. And that runner before us gave everything. He barely got the baton to us. He was on his way down. Like, ah! Everything went in slow motion. Ah! It went into slow motion, but they got that baton into our hands. It was hard. You could get any picture from Damascus, Beirut, Lagos, Hyderabad, from the 1930s, 40s, 50s. You don't find no women in hijab. Istanbul, Ankara, skirts up to the knees. The ruling party, the post-colonial party, is the socialist this and the communist that, and the nationalist this. And what did it take to transform those images? So now you look at a picture of downtown Cairo or downtown Istanbul or downtown Karachi or downtown Baghdad. There are Muslim women everywhere. See men in jalabiyas everywhere. You go to the Gambia now, see Muslims everywhere. But it was a struggle to reclaim that heritage. It was a struggle so that we could say La ilaha illallah. Now we have that baton. So we got it now. Bam. And we got to put it in the hand of those coming after us. Don't drop the baton. Don't be the point that the team loses. Metaphorically speaking, because you say La ilaha illallah, you're a winner. But in terms of passing on that heritage, keeping those chains alive, al-isnad min ad-din. Yeah. Got the baton, got the mic too. Telling that I want to go home and sleep. But that heritage, alhamdulillah, you see the revival, all these young folks memorizing Quran, studying the religion. MashaAllah, let's pass it on. And let's get out there. I was talking earlier, one of the old soldiers, we were out in these streets. We was out in the streets. We're shutting down the drug traffic. It's like, listen, you ain't selling drugs here. No, Muslims live on this block. Muslims are here now. They're selling no drugs here. And people left and shut down operations. The Muslims aren't playing. They're making dawah. Like you talk about disrupting, man. We disrupting the Pan-Africanist meeting. We sitting there quietly waiting for Q&A. Like, sir, you said that Islam destroyed and Arabic and the Arabs destroyed indigenous African culture. And we need to replace Islam with a real, true African religion. You say you're going to call your African religion Kwanzaa. What's the foundation and pillars of Kwanzaa? Oh, okay, my brother. Imani. You realize that's Arabic and Islam, right? What does Imani mean? Faith. Islam, check. Ujama. Like Jama'ah. Unity. Islam, Arabic, check. And you're saying all this coming out of a African language. What is that African language, Mr. Pan-African? Swahili. Arabic, check. You know, Swahili, Sahil, the coast. Sawahil, the coast, plural of coast. Normally a nisbah ila al-mufrad, but yajuz a nisbah ila al-jami'. You can make the attribution to the plural, so as opposed to Sahili, Swahili, the language of the coast. Arabic, Islam, check. Stop running from it and run to it, my brother. Stop running from it and run to it. May Allah give us tawfiq to open the doors so people can run to it. To be the messengers that bring the message to the people and that recognize our history and unify our ranks around a common history that immediately, and I'll conclude with this, gives us legitimacy. They tell you, and we mentioned earlier, you don't belong here, this is a Judeo-Christian country, etc., etc. And you say, wait a minute, my ancestors were here before your ancestors were here. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Pedro Khilafo. I'm talking about Ayyub bin Sulaiman. I'm talking about Amanutu. I'm talking about Uthman. I'm talking about Ibrahim Abdurrahman. I'm talking about Umar bin Sa'id. I'm talking about Muhammad Bilali. I'm talking about Salih Bilali. I'm talking about all of those Muslims. I'm talking about Kunta Kinte, whose blood, sweat, and tears built this country. And you're not coming over here and tell me I don't belong because my ancestors built this country so your ancestors could come here and get rich off of their free labor. So just shut up, go home, leave me alone, and let me make my da'wah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Jazakallah khair, Imam Zaid. Just want to remind everybody we have another program tomorrow, inshallah, with Sister Aisha Prime, preserving our legacy by knowing our history, inshallah. So that will be after Salatul Isha. Salatul Isha is at 7:45. We'll be in this room as well, inshallah. Please bring your families and friends along with you.
This was the introduction. So bring your midnight snack. Alhamdulillah. Can I ask some questions?
Is anybody?
فأين تذهبون?
Okay. Burn the midnight oil, inshallah. If anybody has any questions, inshallah, we'll take a couple of questions, inshallah. We'll start with